Welcome everyone to this Housing Justice Educational Forum sponsored by Making Housing and Community Happen and the Pasadena Affordable Housing Coalition. Glad you could make it this evening. Let's begin with a moment of silence to ground ourselves spiritually, remembering all of our sisters and brothers who suffer from lack of housing or housing insecurity. Perhaps there are people here among us who are in that situation. And also let's remember in this time those in Ukraine and elsewhere who suffer from war and displacement. Let's take a moment of silence. Okay, well, welcome again, everyone. Glad that you could join us this evening. This evening's program is going to be very informative, educational, and interactive. We will be looking at 6 different policy areas for the city of Pasadena for something called the housing element, which Phil Burns will explain to us shortly. If 6 different policy areas sounds overwhelming, don't fear. We're going to make this interactive by splitting up into breakout rooms where we will each talk about, each of our breakout rooms will discuss one policy area. So not so bad, right? Now, you may be wondering, who are Making Housing and Community Happen and the Pasadena Affordable Housing Coalition? Well, I'm glad you asked. In a few minutes, Ed Washatka will explain who the Pasadena Affordable Housing Coalition is, but right now I want to briefly tell you about Making Housing and Community Happen, aka MHCH. Our website says that we equip congregations, community leaders, and neighbors with practical tools needed to transform their communities, to end homelessness, and to stabilize the cost of housing through education, advocacy, organizing, and advisement. And that is true. We do all of that. We are based here in Pasadena, and much of our work is focused locally, but some of our work stretches across the state, and our educational work stretches across the nation. We did a Housing Justice Institute in North Carolina not too long ago. Locally, we have 6 teams: the Congregational Land Team, which works with congregations across Southern California to build affordable housing. Our Community Land Trust Team, which is working to form the first community land trust in the San Gabriel Valley. Excuse me, something just happened to my thing. Okay. So in the Community Land Trust Team is trying to form the first community land trust in the San Gabriel Valley, making homes affordable because people only have to buy the home and not the land on which the home sits, which will be owned by a nonprofit. Our North Fair Oaks Empowerment Team, which is working to beautify and not gentrify the North Fair Oaks area of Pasadena through multiple initiatives, including complete streets and affordable housing. Our Safe Parking Team, which last year established the first safe parking program in the San Gabriel Valley, where people who live in their cars have a safe place to park and also receive services such as housing placement. At least one person has been housed through that program already. And finally, our Affordable and Supportive Housing Advocates Team, which is our main advocacy team and has led successful campaigns such as winning approval of 70 units of permanent supportive housing for seniors experiencing homelessness at the corner of Fair Oaks and Orange Grove. That's going to break ground in 3 months. They also won a campaign for 111 units of senior housing. This campaign was sort of launched by Mayor Tornick, former Mayor Tornick, who's here with us tonight. Then we jumped on it. And so that is going to be 111 units of senior housing, some of it permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness right in our civic center. So I've mentioned some of our successes. There are many others, such as the Inclusionary Ordinance, which has produced more than 1,000 units of affordable housing throughout the city, with more in the pipeline. But enough about us. We have with us this evening someone who has lived experience of what affordable housing can do. Lindsay Dennis is a lived expertise California state policy advisor, and she will soon be doing some important advocacy work at the state level through storytelling. And we are going to benefit from that storytelling this evening. So Lindsay, thank you for coming tonight. We are eager to hear your story. Take it away, unmute yourself and tell us your story.
Great. Thank you so much, Bert. I really appreciate that introduction. My name is Lindsay Dennis, and I'm just going to jump right in and tell you about my first day of being unhoused. I had recently graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology and had undiagnosed bipolar disorder. I had no coping skills for an undiagnosed condition other than unhealthy ones, so I medicated my pain with huge amounts of alcohol. My poor parents suffered watching me, and since I was living with them at the time, they asked me to leave their home. I remember being suicidal because I never felt so lost or so much fear. That night, I tried to take my life but survived with a broken heart. I would rather have been dead than unhoused. With nothing to do, nowhere to go, and no sense of safety, I felt afraid constantly, and homelessness was more than I could handle. I was in and out of hospitals and psych wards, motels, sober living places, rehabs, you name it. After being hospitalized or institutionalized a dozen times to detox, or because of another suicide attempt, I was finally diagnosed with bipolar disorder. In total, I experienced 7 years of pain and fear with bouts of being unhoused. Eventually, I found the right medication and received Section 8 housing. Actually, I was fast-tracked to receive Section 8 through my mental health care provider here in Pasadena. I don't know what would have happened to me otherwise. Secure and stable housing is key to mental health stability, recovery from drugs and alcohol, physical health, finding and maintaining employment, and improving healthy social support and skills, to name a few benefits. Housing must come first to obtain and maintain everything I mentioned. Without housing, these things are nearly impossible because the trauma of being unhoused exacerbates every issue. I have had permanent housing in Pasadena with Section 8 for 12 years. I've lived in my current apartment for over 6 years and have an excellent relationship with my landlord. I always pay rent on time and take good care of my home. I'm proud of where I am today. I feel good about what I'm doing and how I'm living and that my life has meaning. If people who don't have homes are given a chance to improve their lives, of course we will. And we have the right to be housed. Everyone does. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Lindsay. That's a powerful story that demonstrates the importance of stable, affordable housing. So next we have Edwa Shotka, who is an amazing organizer here in Pasadena for affordable housing and many other justice initiatives. And he will provide the background about the coalition and the 6 policy areas. So Ed?
Good evening. The Pasadena Affordable Housing Coalition was first formed last January by 3 organizations: Pasadena's Organizing for Progress, of which I am a member, and Making Housing Community Happen, which is Jill, and Abundant Housing LA, their San Gabriel Valley organizer. From that very first meeting, or I should say since that very first meeting, we now have 15 different organizations in Pasadena that are members of the Affordable Housing Coalition. Those organizations, some of them are faith-based and some of them are secular. They include ACT, Affordable Housing Services. I just want to run through these real quick to honor them. Clergy and Community Coalition, Democrats at Pasadena Foothills, the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, League of Women Voters, Pasadena area, Making Housing and Community Happen, the National Day Labor Organizing Network, which runs the job center on Lake, Complete Streets Coalition, Foursquare Church, Pasadena's Organizing for Progress, as I said, Pasadenans for All, Social Justice, and the Social Justice Committee of the Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center. And tonight we have some of representatives of those organizations with us. So when we were formed, we talked about what it is that we were trying to accomplish. And we were formed around the idea of impacting then the housing element, because the housing element is the city's policy. Now, Jill can tell you, she's been in this work for 20 years. And a lot of times over the years, and she's fighting actions to confront a particular development, to get more affordable units, if you will, into that particular development. And so when we were forming the Affordable Housing Coalition, we said, well, that's just a very tactical approach to try to get more affordable housing in these developments, or to try to get permanent supportive housing for our homeless. What we really need to do, if we're going to bring these organizations together, is to impact the city's policy, because it's that policy that has the long-term effects. And the housing element is an 8-year policy. It is renewed every 8 years. And we are now in that moment. This is the year where we're going to, the city, like all cities in California, is updating their housing elements, various housing elements. And so that's what we are, that's what we were formed for. And part of our objective then is to have community meetings. And we've had them actually going back to last January, where we take input from the various members of the coalition, as well as informing members of the community, like this meeting this evening. The idea is to tell people what a housing element is, to tell them what the policies are that they can have an impact on, so that then they will be aware and trained, if you will, to make public comment. And the first public comment we made, so you say, well, what impact have we had thus far? Well, the first public comment we made was back last August, and where we announced the 26 policy solutions that we wanted to see incorporated somehow or other into the housing element. And those 26 solutions, as Bert was saying at the top, are broken down into 6 areas. 6 areas. And we have facilitators then, after we finish with this introduction, where you can go into one of those 6 rooms. There'll be a room, a breakout room, and you can talk about those 6 areas. And those areas are tenant protections, enabling zoning solutions, because it's zoning that governs how land is used, funding solutions. So the idea is to come up with more funding that can be provided to build or sustain affordable housing. The idea also is ending housing as a human right. That is something we feel very strongly about inside of this coalition. All of the coalition members believe that housing is a human right. And so that's where we look to find policies that can end homelessness. Another one is to enable preservation solutions. And what we're talking about preservation here is basically preserving the affordable housing that already exists. And lastly, the last area is affirmatively furthering fair housing. And what that is, basically, it's looking for the city to create policies in line with state and federal law that ensure racially and economically integrated neighborhoods. Now, those are 6 areas. You'll be able to move into those rooms in a moment. So another question you might ask, well, so what have we done to date? I mean, we had this original submission back in August. Well, we've done 2 things. And I would say, and one accomplishment that we're going to talk about. So the 2 things were, when the city submitted its initial draft back in October, we commented on that draft and sent it up to the state Housing and Community Development Department. And when the state's Housing and Community Development Department responded back to the city in October, they said, look, we've heard from the community, meaning us, the Affordable Housing Coalition, as well as Making Housing and Community Happen and other organizations. And how come what they said to you in their public meetings wasn't incorporated into your housing element? So they told the city, well, you've got to redraft that housing element. You have to revise that housing element. So the city did. And they submitted that revision on December 29th. And the state has responded to that revision the end of last week. I haven't been able to get a copy of it yet. I'm told the city has it. It's not, I can't find it on their website if they posted it. But I want you to know, when they sent their revision in, we read it. Many of the people you see on this screen, we broke ourselves up into teams, because that's a 250-page document they submitted. We broke it down and we said, okay, let's line up what they submitted and see if it lines up with our policies. And once again, we informed the state that, look, there's these gaps. They still haven't closed the gaps that you directed them to close back in October. So we sent a letter to the city council on Monday, once again, asking them to work on closing these gaps. And this is our effort, the Affordable Housing Coalition and Making Housing and Community Happens effort to engage the community this evening, to inform those of you who are interested in this policy change, to give you some background, to prepare some comments, because what's going to happen on March 16th is they're going to have a meeting, March 16th and March 30th, and we'll give you some more information on that, where they're going to take public comment. And that's one of the things that the coalition has accomplished. Besides sending comments in, one of the things that we said repeatedly was the city is not holding enough open public meetings where the community can make public comment. So the city has heard that now. They're going to be offering 2 more opportunities for community members to make the comment. So that's basically what the Affordable Housing Coalition is, what we've done to date. And tonight's meeting is just another step along that way. I think that's concludes my introduction. Bert, unless you, the next up is Phil Burns. Phil Burns is going to present to you a little bit of background about what is a housing element, and and why is it so important, and why does it govern policy. Phil is a senior general managing partner of the Arroyo Group, and he and his firm have created, I believe, some policies or worked on housing elements in other communities. So Phil, please.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, everyone. Make it real brief here because your introduction was very thorough and very good, I think, about the process that we've been on as a coalition and also as a city over the last several months, maybe a year now, actually, that been preparing this housing element. For those who are kind of new to this discussion, the housing element, as Ed mentioned, is the city's policy document related to housing. The housing element is one of the elements of the city's general plan, which, you know, we could think of as like the constitution for the city, at least for, you know, generally for the general plan, about a 15-year period. But in the case of the housing element, an 8-year period in which it kind of sets out the major guiding goals, policies, and then critically, the programs or the things the city will actually do to achieve its housing goals. And then also it presents a list of sites that are meant to demonstrate that the city has sufficient zoning, has sufficiently encouraged the development of housing and affordable housing in particular. So the housing element is very unique among the elements of general plans because it is the only one that is actively reviewed and must be certified by the state government. So it is something that it's very common policy in all kinds of planning in other countries, but in the United States, it's relatively rare. So this is something that has been on the books in California since 1969. But for the longest time, it has been treated as kind of something that, you know, it's just a checklist that you've got to do. The state doesn't really care. The state doesn't really have any penalties to enforce if you do a good job, if you don't do a good job. But slowly and then quite quickly, actually, since 2017, the laws have been strengthened significantly to make it so that the state actually has teeth now. And so we're starting to see, as you know, this process that Ed's talking about of going back and forth between the city and HCD and our comments, that the state is now a lot more serious about cities, not just Pasadena, every city, making sure that every city is doing its fair share to address this housing crisis that has got just so dire across the state. So while the housing element has many parts to it, there are a couple of things that are really, really critical because they have more force, more kind of legal force. And the first of those is the commitments that are made by the city in its housing programs. So where the city says, you know, we will set aside a certain amount of funding for X, or we will change our zoning ordinance to address Y constraint that there is to the building of affordable housing, etc. HCD is now actually kind of following up with cities, and I have to say, you know, Jill and this group has followed up with the city of Pasadena in particular to make sure that those commitments are actually followed through on. So what do we see in Pasadena's housing element? There's been a great aversion to make commitments, right? Because you know that now they will be held, you know, the city will be held to those commitments. And that's one of the big things that HCD has called out the city for. You've said a lot of nice language, but there's no commitment. And unfortunately, that's something that, you know, is pretty common in our day and age. You know, basically everybody pays lip service to affordable housing, but it's really about what roadblocks do you put up to slow or stop affordable housing that is actually causing, that's a large part anyway, of causing the crisis that we're in. The second kind of important from a legal standpoint, part of the housing element would be the sites inventory, which is that list of sites that says, yes, you know, Pasadena has sufficient zoning to meet its fair share of all the housing that needs to be built in California. And when a site is included in that sites inventory, there's a certain number of units and there's a certain affordability level that's assigned to those units. Many of them are low income. What does that mean? That means that if a project is proposed on that piece of land that has, you know, that affordability level, that has that number of housing units on it, then the city needs to approve that project. It doesn't mean that there can't be any public input, but it does mean that the city is required to allow that project to move forward. And so, you know, again, what has the approach been on the city's part? And I don't want to say that Pasadena is unique. It's not unique, you know. Everybody's doing this, but what they try to do is show, hey, we already have the zoning in place to accommodate all of these housing units. And therefore, we don't have to change our zoning. We don't have to change our zoning because if we change our zoning someplace, then we actually, or we include another site in our sites inventory, then we actually have to allow the project to go forward. And so we only want, you know, we don't want to change our land use policy. We want to keep things the way they are. And so that has also been flagged by HCD on multiple occasions as, you know, the city has not, they have not done this analysis in an appropriate fashion. Mostly what we see is that they've included many low-income units on large shopping centers, for example, in Hastings Ranch in East Pasadena, which are economically thriving, which are owned by, you know, private for-profit landowners that are really unlikely to, you know, all of a sudden turn the property over to affordable housing development. So that, you know, that's been something that HCD has flagged as well. And then the third area that they have flagged great, you know, a lot is the affirmatively furthering fair housing, which Ed mentioned as well, and which Ed and Margaret are going to be talking about in their breakout session, where the city is required to demonstrate actions and commitments that are specific and meaningful to overcome patterns of segregation and foster more inclusive communities. And so that, again, HCD has found that the housing element as it stands today does not do that. So actually, HCD did just, they gave their second letter back to the city. I'm not sure if you mentioned this, Ed, on February 25th. And they agreed entirely with us. And they said, basically, between the first time that the city submitted to HCD and the second time, there were almost no changes. And they issued almost the exact same letter back to the city saying that you need to address the things that they said the first time. And so here we are. That's why the city is going to be having more public meetings. And that's why this process continues, and you all become very, very important. So with that, I guess we can go to the breakouts.
No, not yet.
Oh, no, sorry.
Not yet. Sorry. So we have representatives of each of the groups in the coalition, not each of the groups, like 4 of the groups in the coalition here tonight, I think. And we told them we would give them 90 seconds. You don't have to take the whole 90 seconds, but 90 seconds to tell us what the name of your group, and then what is the policy proposal that you really want, that your group really wants. So the first person I have is Michelle White. So Michelle, can you tell us the group you're representing and the policy you're most passionate about?
Sorry, I'm the executive director of Affordable Housing Services, and we provide rental housing for very low and low income persons, and especially for a limited number of formerly homeless persons.
Please
so
hold.
our
Please
attempt,
hold.
Ed, okay, our main focus is on rental housing and making sure that's available, as well as tenant protections. I'll be leading or involved in the breakout session on tenant protections. I do want to do a shout out for the rent control effort that's going on right now. We have until now, between now and the end of the month, to get in all of our signatures to allow for rent control to be in the city of Pasadena. And I put into the chat the places where you can go to participate in the rent control measure if you want to canvass. And if you haven't signed up, given us your signature, please put your contact information in, and I'll come out and get your signature at your house. We're that desperate. We're close, but we need to make it over the line. So that's it.
Thanks, Michelle. And by the way, I've canvassed several times, and now they got this really great app where you go to every house and you know who's there and you know how they're registered to vote. It's great. I did it last Saturday. It was awesome. So if you haven't canvassed for rent control, do it. It's great. So next, Jill, can you tell us about your organization and what your organization is passionate about?
Yeah, we were introduced earlier and by you, Bert, and I appreciate that. We're passionate about a lot of things. I think that our major campaign for the last 2 years has been on rezoning church land so that we can allow for churches. We have 10 churches in Pasadena throughout the city, which would help with that affirmatively furthering fair housing that is addressing racial justice. And this would allow a mix of incomes throughout our community, which would be great. And so we've been working hard on that campaign. We've also gone to the state. We're working with state lawmakers. We have 9 cities now that are also that Phil Burns is working with that are looking at a religious overlay zone. And there's about 50 churches now that have shown their interest. About 35 of those we're working more closely with, and we're seeing them over the what's the word, the line. They're now with RFPs ready to partner with affordable housing developers. So I love every part of our teams and what we're doing, but I think this has been such a long ongoing campaign that I think that's probably what's at the forefront of my mind right now the most tonight. Thank you.
Right. Excellent. Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Jill. And Ed is representing 2 organizations with the coalition. Ed, do you want to talk about those?
Yes, real quick. So I'm representing ACT and POP, Pasadenans Organizing for Progress. So neither one of those organizations have a particular of the 26 that we're behind. ACT is an organization that works mostly on public campaigns, political campaigns. However, over the years, they have gotten involved in various issues having to do with the school system and redistricting. And just the whole idea of the need for affordable housing is what strikes them as an important policy issue. And the housing element is a public policy. So they are participating in it in that regard. And the same thing for Pasadena's Organizing for Progress. One of the reasons that motivates us is what we want to do is show people how they can become empowered to change public policy. And housing is, as we've talked about, is a fundamental right. And that's the thing that affects everyone day to day. It's how they are housed and how they work and play and get educated. So that's what motivates us to be involved in this. Bert, there's actually 3 more, maybe you know that or not. There's 3 more other organizations that are represented.
No, I don't. Do you want to?
I'll introduce them. So first is Anita Mackey from the League of Women Voters. Then there is Carl Selkin from the Social Justice Committee of the Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center. And then lastly, Andrew Good from Pasadena for All. So Anita first, then Carl, and then Andrew Good. Last, I'm sorry, Blair Miller. Blair Miller also, I think she's still online. I don't know if I see her or not, but Blair Miller from Topher Mathers. There he is, Topher Mathers. Thank you. Topher Mathers from Complete Streets. So we have 4 people left, 4 organizations. So the first one is Anita, and then Carl, and then Topher, and then Andrew Good.
Good evening. The League of Women Voters recently completed a 3-year study of affordable housing and arrived at a position from which we are advocating. The League of Women Voters Pasadena area believes that affordable, safe, decent, and stable housing is critical to healthy communities and is a foundation for social justice. We define affordable as 30% of a household's income. In California, the costs of housing have increased far more rapidly than incomes, and this imbalance has led to the crisis of homelessness and housing insecurity. A community should ensure that an adequate supply of affordable housing is available for all its residents. We support the use of all available government regulations, programs, and funds to meet housing needs, including but not limited to a broad housing element component in each city's general plan based on a study of housing problems and including an action plan for solving them, which will achieve a socioeconomically balanced community. Compliance from our area communities with state law requiring every city to provide a fair share of low and moderate income housing. We support the use of existing rules and the development of new tools to increase housing stability for renters in our area, recognizing the differences between large and small landlords and other relevant distinctions. We would look at things like stabilization of rents and adoption of just cause eviction protections that set forth the rights and responsibilities of both tenants and landlords. As a reminder, the Pasadena Area League does represent 13 cities and Altadena in the East San Gabriel Valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Ed, who's next?
Oprah Mathers.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Topher Mathers, and I'm with the Pasadena Complete Streets Coalition. If you aren't familiar with us, we're a group that's dedicated to ending traffic violence in Pasadena. We want streets to be safer for all road users, pedestrians, cyclists, public transportation. I guess we're interested in having sustainable transportation in the city to address climate change. So some of our main goals in relation to this coalition are removing parking minimums citywide and unbundling parking. Interrelationship between housing and transportation is pretty important. How we build housing kind of defines how we move throughout our cities, and parking minimums increase the cost of housing and promote driving, and ends up releasing more greenhouse gas emissions into our city and makes our streets unsafer. So that's how we're related to the coalition, and that's some policies that we like to see. Regarding our coalition, some of the things that we're working on now are just kind of elevating the visibility of pedestrian deaths in the city, which we've had an unfortunate high number of. And we're working on getting some of our suggestions incorporated in the city's pedestrian plan that the city is working on. Yeah, that's all I have for myself.
Next then is Carl Selkin from the Social Justice Committee of the Pasadena Jewish Temple. And lastly, after Carl would be Andrew Good. Carl?
Yeah. Hello. Thanks for pulling this all together with Bert, Ed, and others. So the Social Justice Committee of Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center was founded about 4, maybe 5 years ago. And it's an organization that pursues a number of different interests, a number of different concerns, all of which from the perspective of the Jewish traditions about justice and equity and welcoming the stranger. And housing is at the center of this, but for us, housing is part of a web of interconnected issues that range from climate to equity and well-balanced sharing of the space that we have, to opportunities for people to find affordable ways to anchor themselves in housing close to jobs so that they don't impact negatively the environment through having to commute, and so that commute does not negatively affect their cost of living. So for us, all of these are interconnected, and we're concerned about things like zoning and land use and the way in which it is easier to put in a drive-through fast food joint where one used to be than it is to take that land and repurpose it, let's say, for housing. So zoning issues are important to us. Also, the idea that we're all one community, and so the opportunities for housing in different parts of the city has to be to work hard, strive against this kind of exclusion of the other that we find in NIMBYism and in gentrification and in the idea of historic preservation as a way of excluding people rather than welcoming people. So all of these different things, of course, are important. So Anne Marie Ote, who's with us today, also from SJC, is very interested in the finance aspect. I'm interested in the zoning aspect. I'd like to be able to, split myself into 8 different pieces and join in all the conversations. But I'm glad that there are so many of you here with the expertise and knowledge follow through on so many of these issues. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you, everyone that spoke for their organizations. Ed, that's everyone, right?
No,
Andrew
Andrew
Good.
Good.
Oh, Andrew, good. Sorry, Andrew. Okay.
No problem. Very briefly, I'm with Pasadena for All. We're a small group of locals here in the Pasadena area. We started up the first summer of the pandemic. We do direct outreach to the unhoused, handing out food, water, hygiene kits. In that time, we go to a lot of local parks, some encampments in the San Gabriel Valley. And it's been kind of heartbreaking to see the people we've met and the stories that they've shared with us. More and more people, I feel like these days are ending up unhoused, and there's a whole mix of social ills that are leading to that. We are trying to do some harm reduction to the degree that we can. For us, I can't speak for everybody in the group, but I do think housing as a human right is a pretty fundamental value, and we would love to see more supportive housing to help people find some stability, find shelter and find safety. And we're very grateful for all the work that everybody in this group does. There's a lot of different groups here who are helping in a lot of ways. We're proud to be working with you guys and hope to see more support for the unhoused in general in Pasadena.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for all that your group is doing. And thanks to all the other groups that spoke. So we're going to, before we go into breakout rooms, we just want to make sure everybody understands what each one of them is. So we want each of the facilitators to, in 30 seconds or less, we want to use as little time as we can to explain what you're going to talk about. So the first breakout room is Michelle White. Can you, I think you probably already said, but can you repeat what your room is about?
Yeah, we're going to be looking at the eviction protections, rent control, anything related to the stability of renters in Pasadena.
Okay, great. And then Phil, can you tell people what yours is about?
Mine is about zoning, simply.
Excellent. Yeah, zoning solutions. And then I'm going to lead one on funding solutions. We've been so good at approving affordable housing that we're running out of funds, and there's not enough funds for all of them in the pipeline. So we're going to talk about, there's like 6 different funding solutions we're going to talk about. So then Anthony, you want to tell people about your breakout room?
I'll be facilitating a breakout on housing as human right. We're going to talk about homelessness and opportunities and also impediments to making it possible to house all our homeless neighbors.
Excellent. Jill.
Yes. So typically when we think about preservation, what comes to mind in Pasadena is like our 100-year-old homes, then restoring them to their original glory, which is actually part of the element. But our focus primarily in our breakout group will be on the preservation of affordability. And so there's a couple ways to look at that. Already with our inclusionary policy, that's permanent, that will never go market rate. And a community land trust are in that same category, that is permanent affordability. We'll be looking at home code violations and ways to help preserve housing and the actual physical part of the housing. So that's our focus for our breakout.
Excellent. Thanks, Jill. And then finally, Ed and Margaret. Ed, are you going to talk about it, or is Margaret?
Margaret, you want to just give the heads up how you're going to lead this?
I can go ahead. Yeah, so I'm going to be discussing AFFH, or affirmatively furthering fair housing. And so we're going to discuss how AFFH addresses spatial inequality and housing discrimination through commitments to meaningful action.
Excellent. Thank you. So, all right. So Anthony is going to put us into breakout groups. Hopefully this will work smoothly with no hiccups.
Yeah, let me explain it. This is new for me. I haven't done this before, but there's always a first time, and we did practice before we started. So what you should see at the bottom of your screen when I press open all rooms is something that says breakout rooms. So you'll click on that and you'll see that there's going to be a listing of rooms zoning, funding, preservation, furthering fair housing, housing as a human right, tenant protection. So you pick the one you want to be in. And we'll be in those rooms for about 15 minutes, and then it'll automatically close, and we'll come back and we'll have a report back.
Okay, so the idea is we're supposed to report back. I know in my room, we didn't like even have time to even start approaching anything like consensus.
No.
So we had a lively discussion, but why don't we perhaps Michelle, you could start by talking about what you had 2 people, so maybe you did get consensus.
Well, what we talked about was people warning the loss of diversity within the city, objecting to how costly it has become, the inability to really use vouchers effectively because landlords discriminate against them. But supposedly that has changed, but I don't know of any testing that's going on to make sure that that's in fact the case. Also objecting to how long the Section 8 waiting list is, and that we see only luxury developments going up. The inclusionary set-asides, that people believe that they're really just not being honored. And that would require some work, some investigation with respect to that too. And then also displacement of tenants, lower income tenants. So those are the things we covered in addition to the things that were listed, like the registry, the other kinds of things that are already included in the goals.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. And let's see, who was the next group on the list? I'm trying to go in order of our list. It's Phil. Phil, do you want to report on your group?
Yeah, so I think we got up to 15 people actually in our group. So only a few actually got to talk, unfortunately. In general, there was enthusiasm for our list of proposals, six zoning related proposals. We did have a little bit of discussion about SB 9 and missing middle and whether it's a good thing, bad thing, that kind of thing. But in general, I think there are folks here that are interested in speaking on missing middle related topics. There are folks that are interested in speaking on affordable housing related topics like congregational land. We had quite a bit of discussion about the need to include institutional and school land in that. And it does seem that the planning commission also gave that direction. So that is in keeping, right? It's going the same way. And then we also had, in terms of our discussion about commercial zones and specific plans, there were two really good points. I thought one was advocating more of kind of a form-based approach as opposed to a use-based approach to zoning and to density. And that's something that we have proposed kind of narrowly in our zoning amendment proposal to allow housing to be built in commercial zones just up to the maximum building envelope. It's called up to the maximum size of the building that a commercial development can be built. So we talked about that and how that kind of approach in general is desirable, and moving away from specific plans in general, and moving away from this idea that council members control land use in their own district. And you can't have a project without the support of the council member in your district. I know we're not as bad as some cities, we all know which one in that respect, but we do appear to have this problem as well. And that was very astutely noted by one of our participants.
Excellent. That's an amazing discussion with 13 people in 15 minutes. That was,
Yeah, wow, Phil.
I'm really impressed. That's excellent. Our group is next, and we I don't know, maybe it was the wrong move, but we spent some time introducing ourselves, so we got to know each other. Maybe that took up a lot of our time, but we barely got through the just looking at the information on the 6 different proposals. But I do want to mention 2 things. One is that the city is supporting a bill sponsored by Senator Portantino, bill I think is 1177, to create a joint powers authority trust fund to fund affordable housing in Pasadena, Glendale, and Burbank. So that's one thing I do want to make people aware of. The other one we talked about the most was the transfer tax, which would be a one-time tax or fee when property changes hands. And it's estimated that it would bring in to Pasadena $22 million per year. And it just so happens that Anne Marie Oti was part of our group. She is with the Building Trades Union, and they are part of the effort in Los Angeles to put that on the ballot there. So she had a wealth of information. If you want to talk to her about it, we need to talk with her more about it, because she knows everything that's going on with that. So
yeah, except the LA proposal really wouldn't fit Pasadena. It starts at basically, was it 5 or 10 million level as the beginning point at which you are assessed the fee, and most of our properties don't transfer at that level.
Actually, even in Los Angeles, 97% of residential properties wouldn't have been covered by this. And so you certainly would look at getting your highest yield from a certain small number of properties, but that would be the math that we would all do. This would apply to commercial property as well. So when there are large facilities changing hands, and again, when we say changing hands, we're not talking about family inheritance. This is, of course, sales of property. So, you could do the math and see. We might be surprised by what we find, or we might be disappointed. Until we do the calculations, we wouldn't know. There are also standard transfer taxes, even on the buy and sale of a modest home. It was applied. A very small one already exists with the county.
Yeah, but their point of a transfer fee, let's say 1% on all property in Pasadena, I think is a very good idea. It's excellent and could be implemented here, especially if you give, let's say, a $5,000 credit. So you're essentially exempting small dollar value residential transfers. I think that has a lot of promise for Pasadena.
Well, coming from the Social Justice Committee, part of my job is definitely to be incredibly open-minded and listen to all ideas and work with. And I do already see the possibly the merit of what you're saying. Again, it certainly shouldn't be one size fits all. But if there is some consensus or interest in some kind of property sale transfer fee, and it could raise a decent amount of money, then
yeah, especially
all of us to work
in
on.
Practical terms, it would be split between the buyer and the seller, and it would be essentially lost on the settlement statement among the escrow fees and title insurance. People pretty much wouldn't even notice it.
All right, then. I think you've made my case for me. Then come to LA and let them know.
All right, so we've got to have more discussion on this, and we will be doing that. I want to let Anthony report back from his group.
Yeah, so one of the things we did talk about was funding of housing for our homeless population, and one of the sources of funding is the inclusionary fee, which is an option for some people who are developing, doing development, but that's not an ideal source. I think we'd like to see something that's more reliable, and that's why we're interested in the transfer fee idea. But that is right now where most of the money comes from that has enabled us to produce housing for our homeless population. Someone asked about whether school land could be used for housing our homeless population, but that's not an option that has been discussed seriously. But there has been a discussion around using school land for affordable housing for teachers and staff. We talked about motel conversion. That was a very promising idea, but that hasn't yielded any actual housing. It would be probably a little cheaper to build affordable housing by adaptive reuse of a motel, but the first effort we made didn't work because of NIMBYism. Not in my backyard, people who are opposed to any kind of homeless housing near them. So we talked about how to overcome that opposition. And the answer is through smaller groups where people can meet people like Lindsay Dennis, people who've experienced homelessness and had their lives transformed. In smaller groups, you can begin to change hearts and minds. So those are some of the things that we talked about in our group. We are committed to ending chronic homelessness in our city, and we believe it's possible. We have reduced the homeless rate by 54%. We think we could do a lot better.
Excellent. Thank you, Anthony. So Jill, your group next.
Yeah, we had a chance to introduce ourselves, and it was great to hear from one gal in our group who's struggling, and she's very involved in many ways, in many teams, and so she was fascinating to listen to. And then my dear friend Carol was in that group, Carol Daly. So they have, I guess, a number of housing units in Monrovia that are at risk of becoming market rate. And so we talked a little bit about the Concord apartments and what it took for the city to make that. It was 150 units. It's 14 stories down on Cordova. And so our city did a stellar job of making those into to keeping them affordable. They partnered with a retirement foundation, which purchased them. And it's a pretty complex story, but our city figured it out. And we've got some savvy folks in our city with our housing department. And so I hope that in Monrovia, they're able to do the same. In terms of other models of preservation, inclusionary, and as well as especially community land trust, we did not have a chance to talk about any of that. We did mention your project, Peggy Renner, on North Lake, and how you guys were able to preserve that. So that was exciting to share.
Excellent. Thank you, Jill. And finally, Ed and Margaret.
All right, I will turn it over to Ed, the scribe.
Right. So we, Margaret gave us some background of what is furthering fair housing and how it's covered from a state perspective. And let me get to I flipped the wrong page here. So part of it we talked about was like one of the things where we talk about ideas is that getting the city to have the political will to stick to commitments, if they even are willing to make the commitments in the first place, is then the political will to actually see them through. And so it becomes incumbent upon us activists to show up at the public meetings and back the council members who want to take those initiatives. So one of the things we talked about, Margaret identified, is that Pasadena is one of the 50 cities within the 50th largest cities. Has what's the gap, Margaret? The wide gap between wealth and the wealth gap?
Yeah, that's accurate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So where does Pasadena rank in that, in the 50 state's 50th largest cities?
It's number 2.
So we are number 2 in that gap. And of course, a lot of that is historical, and we've got historical money, it's on, and Margaret very aptly called out, it's on the perimeter. So the wealth resides on the perimeter, and it certainly does in this community. And those in neighborhoods that are impacted then at the lower end are in the city center or north, in the case of Pasadena, in the northwest. So one of the things we talked about as a solution that was described to us by Jasmine Schuper, who was in our group, was that she has started a foundation which provides a path to home ownership. And so she gets money from the private sector that which she then uses in her foundation to help people secure home ownership. And what she is looking for or suggests to us is that the city, that we look to the city as a partner to enable a foundation. She calls, in fact, the name of her foundation is very creative. It's the Green Line Foundation, sort of a play on words. If you remember, much of the discrimination occurred because of redlining. And we talked a little bit about what Santa Monica's doing, creating a funding or a source, if you will, to provide, and I don't have all the details on that, but to provide a means of home ownership for those who were discriminated against or had their land taken away for one reason or another, like in Pasadena's case, because of the freeway, for example, that occurred in the 1960s and 70s. So that was our big idea, if you will, is to figure out a way to partner between the city and a foundation such as the Green Line Foundation to provide a path for home ownership for those who are unable to acquire a home, to get financing and to get a home, and then build equity. I mean, build, capital.
Thanks, Ed. Excellent. So now that we've discussed all these things, I think we maybe are a little bit better equipped and more knowledgeable about these things. And so the coalition is going to take all of the input that you have given here, that we have together produced here, and we're going to take it into consideration, the coalition and MHCH, and two events we want to make you aware of. Well, more than two events, but one is that the housing task force that the mayor called together is having two open events. One of them is March 16th. The other one is March 30th. And so we want people to attend those events. They're going to be Zoom events. And I believe they're going to be, Phil, do you know what time? You're on the task force. Do you know what time those events are?
I think they're at 7.
7 o'clock. Okay.
I
So
think
7,
it's 6. Pretty sure it's 6.
yeah, so we'll get out word on that. And we need people to show up and to make public comment, have input in that forum about the things we've talked about tonight. And then also for rent control, Michelle, can you tell us what's going on in terms of gathering signatures this weekend?
Yeah, we have to have all of our signatures in by the 28th of this month. What we're trying to do is to get them pulled together within the next 2 weeks. So on each one of the days of the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, there are canvassing opportunities available, and people will meet at Robinson Park at 10 o'clock on Saturday and Sunday. In addition to that, oh geez, I don't have the date for the 5th. I'm sorry, that Saturday. There is a march that is going on that the Job Center has put together to gather signatures for the campaign also.
Excellent. And by the way, if I said this earlier, but I've gathered signatures several times, but this past weekend when I did, they actually had an app where when you go door to door, the app tells you who is in that home and how they're registered to vote. So you're only going to registered voters because that's the only people that can sign it. So you're not wasting your time going to places where people aren't registered to vote. So it makes it really easy and efficient. And so I encourage you to do it. you get out in the nice weather and you get a lot of exercise.
I did it this weekend for ours, exactly. And we had the same software, and it's kind of amazing. It gives you everybody's name, who they are, so you know who to ask for. You introduce yourself and you get to ask them by name, and it makes a huge difference. We had a good signing rate because of that personal touch. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's great.
excellent.
I'm
So-
glad
so-
everybody was so enthusiastic.
Yeah, so get out and do it. You get good exercise, walk around, you know? Excellent. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming.
Wait,
Um,
wait.
Before-
What time are the meetings on the 16th and the 30th?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. And
Before you go, please put your name and email address in chat and we will keep you updated as things progress, okay? Please take that moment. And then Michelle, you want to make another announcement?
no, I wanted to ask a question. It is not clear to me, given where we are with the state, what the next steps are. Makes it feel like they once again, the city once again ignored our input. The state said that. So what happens next?
Oh, okay, so while you're putting your name and address in the chat, I will also tell you kind of the run, that's it, the run of show, if you will, but the run in progress, if you will, of the housing element. Okay, so next step is going to be these 2 city meetings. And those meetings are going to be, once again, on Wednesday, the 16th, 7 o'clock, and Wednesday,
It's
following that.
It's actually 6 o'clock. That's
I'm
what
sorry,
Bill
6
Burns
o'clock.
said.
Thank you, Jill. 6 o'clock on the 16th and 6 o'clock on the 30th. And the specifics of those meetings are going to be along with what's called the Affordable Housing Task Force, and there will be city staff at those meetings. But the idea is to take public comment. Then in April, city staff will present yet again another draft of the housing element to the Planning Commission. I don't know what the date of that Planning Commission meeting is, but they typically meet on the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays of the month. So if you give us your name and email address, we'll keep you informed on that step. Then once the Planning Commission reviews what the staff has created, that document, and if they suggest changes or whatever, that'll be done at the Planning Commission level, and then it goes to the City Council. So for final approval, and then it'll go finally then to the state. And so that step, it occur at the end of April or in early May. But that's what's in front of us over the next 6 weeks or so. 6 to 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks.
We're already past our deadline by weeks and weeks, right?
That is true. Yes, the actual deadline was by the end of the year, but the state, and we're not the only one, we're not the only city or community that is past the deadline. So the state has basically given them some time to pull all this together. That is not unlimited amount of time, and I can't tell you necessarily what that deadline is because I don't have that at the tips of my fingers. But if the city doesn't get its work done, they could be penalized by the state.
Current operative deadline is by October 15th of this year. They have to have completed any rezoning that is required by the housing element. So again, this is another reason why they're trying so hard to not rezone anything, because it will honestly be difficult for them to complete the rezoning on time.
Actually, Bill, they were trying to downzone some East Colorado Boulevard from 87 to 69. So they're making it less likely to build housing in our city, not more likely. So we need to inform HCD of what our city's doing, because that's how we get change.
Yeah.
And we've been able to be successful because we've mobilized people like you to write letters, to speak at city council meetings. And that has been why we have been able to get as much affordable housing approved. It doesn't just happen. The Civic Center was not just the city council out of its own goodness of heart deciding to do it. We had meetings every every Monday, we would have a prayer vigil, and then we would go to the city council with religious leaders, community leaders to talk to them about it. And finally, we wore them down. And now we have 111 units of affordable housing at our civic center. Same with Heritage Square South. Only happens with your support.
Yeah. So I think we've gone over our time for tonight. And so I think Bert was going to have one final thing to close down, and then we need to stop the recording. So Bert, did you want to, and then if you all want to keep, once we turn off the recording, if you all want to stay around and just have a conversation, I'm available. I'd love to do that with and get to know some of you, some amazing folks here on this call tonight. It's love to know more about you. So,
Well, yeah, that was the final thing, was the call to action. Was
okay.
Yeah, we did the call to action. So it's 6 o'clock on the 16th and the 30th for the task force forum, and then also Saturday collecting signatures for rent control.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for your part. So we can probably end recording at this point, and then stick around if you would like.